Thanks so much, and thanks to the goalie team for having me here. I know Nate and I have worked quite a bit over the last few weeks trying to get ready for today, and I'm so super excited. And let me tell you why I'm so excited, because I'm a school social worker, and I love helping kids. And like we were talking about before I got started, I've been helping kids in various settings for a very long time. But as a school social worker, what I came to find out is I can offer supports for 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, but my supports really became limited. So as social workers, we're trained to look at like whole systems. And I came to quickly realize that if I wasn't looking at the systems in which the child was living in, that my support was just, this much. I mean, yes, I had impact, but also being a mom, like I realized like parents needed supports, right? And that my shift kind of changed to having such a heart to helping parents, because as I help the parents, then I also help kiddos. So I'm super excited to be here today to share some knowledge and to share some tips to hopefully just help you, which in turn will also help your children be successful. So not only students, but also for parents, so that your families are successful. I'm going to ask a couple of things. If you will just quickly make sure that you're on mute to minimize any background noise. And then I just want to make sure that, I don't have my chat open, because I get super distracted if I start seeing things come through the chat board. So if you're typing a question directly to me, I'm not going to see it, but Nate is watching the chat board. And then at the end, when we have Q&A, then he will let me know some of your comments and questions, and we will address them at that time. So don't think I'm ignoring you. Okay, so here's the outcomes that I would like to see you get for today. I would like you to leave here with some tips for success for learning at home. I would like you to leave here with some tips for you to feel successful in your multiple roles. I really would love to see this as a space that you feel supported, just like what Nate said, like at the beginning of COVID, they realized that parents were not even asked to do virtual learning. They were thrown into virtual learning, and a lot of the support systems were not in place to empower parents. So if nothing else, I want you to just maybe find some comfort today and support in hearing stories from me or stories from other people on the call. This is a moment for you to focus on yourself. So let's just like take a deep breath and know that this moment that you're giving yourself will better things for your child. And then again, that connection with other parents. Okay, turn page. All right, agreements. Here's some agreements that I'd really like to bring into this space today. I'm going to do a 20-minute info share. We'll do Q&A afterwards. I'm just going to keep it real. Like, yes, I have tons of experience in multiple settings with kids and helping kids, but I don't know everything. Like, people are complicated and behavior is complicated, right? So I am not going to pretend to know everything. And if you ask a question and I don't know the answer, I'm going to tell you I don't know the answer. But here's the beauty of working with kids and working with families is we can problem solve it together. Like, we can be on this journey together to help get you some support and answers. I would like to make sure that while we're in this space that we're respecting each other's reality. So we are all coming from different backgrounds and we're all in different places in our journey. And for us to really be vulnerable that we want, we have to know that there's going to be a respect coming from all participants to just have that vulnerability. And then I hope that we find some moments just to enjoy today. Okay. So I just want to give you a little bit about me, just so that you know who I am. So I do have a master's degree in social work. I'm a licensed master social worker in the state of Texas. I practice as a school social worker, and then recently in the last few months, I have also started therapy in a clinical practice. I am married. We have 5 grown children. We are a combined family of 5 grown children. I have 2 grandchildren, and yes, it's true. Parents, you love your grandchildren more than you love your children. It just is what it is. I am now like an empty nester, and my 2 babies at home are my dog and my cat and my husband. But how I really want to connect with you on this page is for you to know that I'm a mom. And I know that parenting's hard. I've been there. My parenting didn't come without tears. We didn't raise successful children without struggles. And one of these 5 children that I'm not going to point out, but one of these beautiful children did struggle with ADHD. And it was a journey for me. School was not fun for him. He hated school every ounce of the way. He didn't feel successful. And so after he graduated, he didn't immediately go into college, which was heartbreaking for me, but he is in college now, and he's being very successful. He has a 4.0 and is super proud of it. And so that's just a testimony to his abilities and to the hard work that we put in throughout his schooling to get him to that place. So that's me. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to start by just saying this is one of my famous lines that I say to my parents all the time. Parenting is hard, right? When you're young and you don't have your kids yet, you think that you've got it all figured out, and you see kids misbehaving in a restaurant and you think, my kid's never gonna act that way. And then you have that amazing little human being, and they have a will of their own. And all of a sudden, things that you knew as black and white, you no longer know as black and white because your heart is all involved, right? So it's so much harder. But not only is parenting hard, we are now parenting in a pandemic. Parenting in a pandemic is even harder. For parents, there's such a huge expectation and a requirement to pick up new responsibilities while also trying to juggle the emotions of your children and the emotions of yourself. While we're in uncharted territory, we've never been in a pandemic before, and we've never had to virtually educate our children. So how in the world do we get the child the supports that we need while managing our own emotions? These are some of the things that we'll talk about as I give some tips. So as adults, like, we hope that we have a set of coping skills, right? That we've grown into mature emotional adults. And I always say that we let our children borrow our coping skills. Like when our kids are little and they don't have those things, we can look at them and say, well, you're going to be okay because I know this. And now we've never been in this situation before, so it's hard for us to pull from that set of coping skills and say, I know we're going to all be okay because I know this. We don't have that. So there is a sense of struggle that's happening right now. So in my clinical practice and at school, I'm having more and more kids and parents calling me about their kids who are having higher levels of stress, anxiety, restlessness, crying, and whining than ever before. And I genuinely believe that there's some of you on this call that are saying, I get that. That is me also. I see those increases in my kids. But as parents, we are also having increases in stress and anxiety. We're trying to work from home or take care of our children, or maybe some of us have lost jobs. So then what ends up happening is we have this ping pong effect happening, right? Where our children are stressed and their emotional response systems are not regulated, which then causes our emotional response systems to not be regulated. And then it kind of goes back and forth, because then when we're not regulated, our kids also pick up on that, and that affects them. So it's hard parenting in a pandemic because anxiety comes from not knowing or having a sense of not being in control. And there's a lot of that happening right now. So some of the tips we're going to talk about here in a little bit are going to be about how can we gain that sense of control to ease some of these symptoms of stress and anxiety and all of those things. So children with neurosensory challenges, in the midst of it, so they already have all of these challenges that are very similar to anxiety, right? They mimic kind of the same symptoms. So this is going to be my geek out moment. Like I love talking about neuroscience in the brain. So just hang with me just for a moment. I don't want to bore you, but I think it's super important that we have a little bit of understanding of brain functioning, which then helps to make more sense why I chose the two tips that I chose. So brain, like this frontal lobe of the brain, the front part of the brain is so super important because that's what regulates our decision making. That's where our decision making comes from. That's where emotional regulation comes from. That's where concentration happens. That's where organization happens. Like there's a lot that happens right here. Social skills come from there. That's part of our personality. All of that's happening in the frontal lobe. Well, children with neurosensory challenges, it's shown that there's actually different chemicals and different functioning that's happening in that part of the brain. So that's why you see these social skills, decision-making, emotional regulation, concentration, all of those things are more challenging for kids with neurosensory challenges. On top of all of that, we've got anxiety that's happening in our virtual worlds right now. And anxiety also affects that same space in the brain. So now you have kids that already have these challenges and then you're adding anxiety on top of that. And I'm just hearing over and over and over again from parents the insecurities that kids are having and parents not knowing what to do about that. So I'm hoping today, like that's important. Like, again, that's my geek out moment. I could talk about the brain all day. I want to be able to leave here today with some really good tips. And it's important for you to have this background because then the tips make more sense. So I think the other challenge that we're dealing with, especially with kids with neurosensory challenges, and for parents of those kiddos, is we now have a work and school and home collision, right? Like work, school is typically the space that we go where there's high expectations based on performance. It's usually very structured and it's very demanding, okay? And that's part of why our kids with neurosensory challenges have these difficulties at school, because that's asking for a lot of demand of that frontal lobe of the brain that they already struggle with, okay? Our home space is typically our space where we have relaxation. It's typically, like I'm sure that you all have structure, but it's typically less structured. It's our relaxation place. It's our place of leisure. It's our place of play. Well, now we're losing that sense of where do we rest, because now these demands of expectation and performance are taking place in our home. So part of what we're going to talk about is how does it look like that we can separate those things so that kids and parents can still have that space to relax and have leisure time to recoup and then be ready for school and performance. So we are now to our tips. Now that I gave you all of that background information, tip number 1 is provide routine. Okay, I know so many of you are probably taking a deep breath at this moment to hear that, because I'm sure you have heard over and over and over again so many times that you've lost fingers and toes to count the importance of routine. So we're going to talk a little bit again about why that's so important in relation to all of the information that I just gave you. Okay. So routine, the reason why routine is so important is because, again, remember I talked about how we almost lend our kids our coping skills. Okay. So for our neurosensory challenged kids, this part of the brain lacks that ability to organize and concentrate and have emotional regulation, all of those things. Okay. Anxiety, as you remember I talked about earlier, is what happens when we have a sense of loss of control or not knowing. So when you create a routine for your child and for yourself, what you're doing is you're creating a safe space for your child to understand what comes next and a sense of knowing, which not only decreases that anxiety, it also allows that child that ability to concentrate better, because they're not trying to figure out, like, how do I organize and what comes next? And oh my goodness, I don't know what's going on. So from personal experience, like my kiddo really needed that structure. And so I love to, one of my hobbies is to decorate my home. And I love to rearrange my furniture. I love to shop. I love to buy things. And I literally started to recognize that every other month when I got bored with my furniture placement and I changed my furniture, my young child that was dealing with ADHD was all of a sudden a little bit more kind of aggressive, emotional outburst. And I realized I was stressing him out. Like, it was no big deal for me to change my environment, but excuse me, every time I changed my environment for him, it was super stressful because he dealt with anxiety and he didn't have those firm decision-making skills or emotional regulation skills to help deal with the constant change that I was giving to him. So one thing that I'm going to recommend to you, moms and dads, is to provide a home routine and a school routine. So for me, who's not a very at that, in this virtual world, I found that when I wake up at a certain time, take my shower, get dressed as if I was leaving my house and going to work, I had a more successful day. It made me much more organized from the get-go. I am going to encourage you to create that same routine and then stick with it every day during your work week. When your child knows what's coming, it's going to be easier for him to concentrate and you'll get less behaviors and less of the emotional outbursts. I recommend that you have a school routine that happens in the same place every day for school. That's that space where you're expected to have high performance, the demands are there, and then you have the school routine within the home routine so that there's times you can actually walk away from that school routine and have time for play, which we'll talk about next. So the benefits of creating a routine are it decreases anxiety, it creates that emotional regulation, it provides structure to meet expectations, because when there's a routine, then you know, okay, we're going to do schoolwork for 5 minutes and then you're going to get a 5-minute break. Then we're going to do work for 10 minutes and then we're going to have a 5-minute break. Okay, so within that 5 minutes, you will actually get more work because we're setting a time and then there's a specific end to that time. It separates work and leisure. So that way you can protect your family, you can protect your home. And let's face it, mom and dad, it's going to keep you better organized because we're juggling a lot, right? We're working in our space. We're now homeschooling our kids. We're dealing with our own stress and anxieties. So it's really going to provide a space for you to provide that emotional regulation that then will feed into your child's emotional regulation. Okay. All right. Tip number 2. Tip number 2 is rest. Rest is taking a break from the demands of work and having leisure time. And then also actually scheduling play. Like, I don't mean play like you're going to go sit down and pick up toys. Yes, play could look like you're picking up toys and playing with your kiddo. But play, I'm using the word play to mean it is structured, just relaxation, fun with laughter with your children, laughter with your family. When all of this first started happening with COVID, we live in a society that highly values busyness. And I would take a walk around the neighborhood back in those first few months of March and April, and I was seeing dads in the middle of the day playing basketball with their kids in the driveway. And it was dads that I had never even really seen before because dads are busy working, right? And I saw whole families walking in the neighborhood. My husband and I decided we were going to get bikes for part of our leisure time. We had to search for like 2 months for bikes. We couldn't find bikes at any store. We couldn't find bikes online. I didn't know that COVID equaled bike, but apparently it did. But I saw whole families out doing things together. Now what's happening as I'm starting to talk to parents, I'm starting to get these phone calls about these stress levels coming back in our kids and these stress levels coming back in our parents is we're starting to open up again. You know, businesses are opening, schools are opening, the demand is coming back, like that demand. And I'm seeing less and less of that just family time or relaxation time that we're starting to see. So you are going to schedule rest time. You are going to schedule leisure and playtime. So again, you've got this routine. We've already talked about creating a routine. In your routine, you are going to actually schedule rest. So here's some of the important things that you really need to understand about rest. When your body's resting, there's actually important things that are happening in the cell function that help to rejuvenate the brain, that help to rejuvenate the mind. And when you don't rest appropriately, then you're depriving your body of certain things that it really needs to recoup for the next day. Not being in a restful state increases that space of anxiety, which again changes our behaviors and our response to behaviors. It also becomes very difficult to have emotional regulation. Again, creating a deficit in that frontal lobe. And then relationship capacity. I really want to rest here for a moment about relationship capacity. When we are tired and we are not rest and we have these moments of anxiety, it becomes very difficult as parents to respond appropriately to our kiddos. And then we get in this crazy negative space where the more negative energy we have in reacting to our children, then the more negative energy they have in responding to us. And then it just becomes very toxic. And that's a horrible space to live in our homes. I know we've all been there, like I said earlier, parenting is hard. We all have those moments. But part of the benefits of rest and taking time to rest and just have that unstructured playtime together where you're laughing creates a relationship capacity where you're in an emotional space to then deal with the challenges that your child's having, and it builds the relationship. So I, again, am like so super thankful that you invited me here today. I hope that I shared some tips with you and connected with you in a space that I don't want you just to survive what's going on in virtual learning with your kiddos right now. I genuinely want your relationships and your families to thrive. So again, Nate, thanks so much for having me. And I genuinely hope that I gave y'all some tips to walk away with today that will help your family to thrive.